A final Madden Benz Unfiltered before the NFL draft. The next time you see us together, we'll be talking about who the Steelers took in the first round and beyond. Although, Mark, you've been saying since October it will be Joey Porter Jr. Do you still feel that way now, or has anything happened over the draft speculation months to change your mind?
Nah, take Peasy's kid. Tim, it disturbs me that I appear to be in black and white and you're in color.
You look like you're in color to me.
I look like a piece of fast food roast beef that was left out on the sidewalk too long. My God. We got to do ththese later in the day, maybe. No, I think it's going to be Peasy's kid. I think Banks, the cornerback from Maryland, might be a plan B. But I don't know about you, but I've been told that they see cornerback as their first priority. Not worth, bypassing a superior player at another position of need to definitely take a cornerback, but all things being equal, a priority.
If nothing else, I think in free agency, and it may be nothing else, but if nothing else in free agency, I think they've properly girded themselves to avoid doing just that at pretty much any other position besides corner. Because they don't have, in my opinion, a third corner that can really effectively play outside the numbers, I could still see them reaching for a guy.
I'm not sure they have a second corner. I mean, who are their corners right now besides Patrick Peterson?
Well, Levi Wallace will start somewhere.
Yeah, he's okay. Yeah, you're right.
I would prefer to have a true guy that can play outside the numbers and maybe have Wallace play the slot. But if they can't do that, then they can have Wallace outside and Millette potentially play the slot. They've got Keanu Neal could do that. They've got some options, I guess, to fulfill those roles.
Tim, I don't think they do. I don't think they do. The guys you just mentioned, their best option is to draft Peasy's kid.
Well, there you go. I think that's where I'm going with it, is that with Artie Burns, they really reached in that situation. I don't think they have to reach that desperately. But, yeah, that position is, I think, the one true area where they have to get somebody. Unless you see tackle, like they're never going to find themselves a capable veteran swing tackle to play either position for this year as depth. I guess you could argue that too, but I still think getting a really top-notch tackle will be as much about starting for every year beyond this one as anything.
Yeah, and I will say this about the priority of cornerback. I would be shocked if they didn't take one in the first two picks. And I think there's enough decent cornerbacks in this draft where you could get a decent one at 32.
Mark Dominic, Daniel Jeremiah, both of the NFL Network, Dominic on the radio side, Jeremiah on the TV side, endorsed the idea of going tackle first if one of those top four guys roughly is on the board, and then going corner later because the corner depth, the talent of corner depth is better as opposed to tackle. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, like I just said, I think you get a decent one at 32. I've heard the name. Let me check my notes. Darnell Wright from Tennessee at tackle. Now, he's mostly a right tackle. Then again, I'm not the biggest fan of Chooks either. Maybe you put all three of them, Chooks, Wright, and Moore, into a competition, and then just figure out who plays where, at some point. But yeah, I still think the best move would be to trade up to 9 and get one of the big time tackles, but it just doesn't seem they're going to do that.
Especially since I think they see Skronsky as more of a guard than a tackle, and they've already loaded up at guard, obviously. So I think
Tim, let me ask you this. I did a dissertation on my show the other day. I put forth the notion the Steelers don't draft to be great. They draft to be good. That they don't assemble their roster to be great. They do it to be good. They try to go 9-8 all the time, make the playoffs as much as possible. Maybe you win a playoff game now and again. They just go for consistency. And I don't know how anybody could argue with me when I see the Baltimore Ravens go to OBJ. They might get DeAndre Hopkins, and the Steelers won't trade up to number 9.
And they signed Allen Robinson.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, I think there's some truth to that. I think there's some truth to that in large part, Mark, because they've so often drafted 20 and below. But the past few years, when they've missed the playoffs or been eliminated in the first round and only had 9 wins, they have drafted higher middle than what we're used to seeing. And maybe it is time to swing for the fences and hit a few home runs. And I don't know, perhaps they've been spooked off of that because things didn't work out with Devin Bush, but they traded up and got Troy Polamalu too, and he wound up in the Hall of Fame.
Yeah, well, I was cringing when people would cite Bush as a reason to not trade up. I mean, Polamalu. I mean, I'd trade up to get Bush if it meant trading up to get Polamalu. You did more than break even there. But it's just the Steeler way, for better or worse. And, I feel dumb. Well, not dumb because it's a long 3 hours to fill every day. But after I talk about trading up to 9, and then I realize, a couple days after I started that discussion, it's the Steelers. There's just no way they're going to do that.
I think the smarter move might be if they can't swing it up to 9, and maybe it's not even a matter of being smarter. If they just can't do it, if they can't figure out a way to trade into the top 10, take the 17th pick, figure out a way to finagle something with a team in the back third of the first round, try to trade back in with number 32, and then you maybe get yourself a better tackle or a better corner, whatever you don't get at 17.
I just hate the constant discussion leading up. I'll be so happy.
It is too long. Yes, it's very long.
Well, no, it's too long for most, Tim. I mean, one thing I do like about the way I approach it is I haven't talked much draft until starting last week. I just don't think it was something that merited conversation from the end of the season through the draft when the circumstances almost don't change at all in that time. So I've been a little more discretionary in terms of how much I've talked about it. But even now, it seems like too much. It seems overwhelming. I think the real talk starts once you know who you got.
Yeah, and I think also, Mark, we're still in that frame of mind from last year, too, when it was a quarterback-centric conversation. It meant so much more. You had the Pickett tie-in. We were so dug into the draft for so long that we're still in that kind of mode this year, even though we're just talking about corners and tackles.
Maybe. I just think we're in a town where a lot of people think the Steelers are all that matter, and I don't.
The other thing about this is, we can talk about the draft all we want. We can talk about who they signed and how they put Band-Aids on problems when it comes to roster situations and free agency. The only thing that matters in my eyes is how Kenny Pickett takes the expanded playbook that I hope he's given in year 2 after being okay, especially towards the end of the season in year 1. Like what he does with an expanded playbook and an expanded menu and expanded responsibility in the offense, be all, end all, that is story numero uno.
Yeah, I agree. By the way, did you see that Peter King says the Steelers are going to take a receiver?
In the first round?
Yeah.
Who do you have?
At one point, Kuiper said that too. And I just don't think that's going to happen, but it goes to show you how. I mean, and Peter King is the best mock drafter too, aside from being America's finest football writer. But he's saying they need somebody to partner up with Pickens. Well, I thought they paid Deontay Johnson all that money to do that, despite him having no touchdowns this past year. But as far as Pickett goes, yeah. I mean, he's the whole story. And the part of the story we don't talk about is he had 2 concussions. Tua had 3. And we're acting like that difference of 1, makes his head likely to fall off organically at some point. Although his were on national TV and much more graphic than Pickett's. But and then that brings me back to drafting a tackle to protect Pickett.
All right, Steelers fans, want to hear from you on the NFL draft. As far as the wide receiver thing, look, I guess I get it because Addison is out there, but I don't see a wide receiver worthy to be taken at 17.
They're just not drafting a wide receiver.
Yeah, I mean, I could see it in the mid-rounds.
They signed Allen Robinson to avoid having to draft one maybe even in the mid-rounds.
That's where it goes back to what I said before, much like the inside linebackers, much like the depth at guard, much like the depth at safety by Keanu Neal. Like they got a guy to protect themselves if they don't get a logical spot to draft a wide receiver. It's just not as much of a priority now, whereas the tackle and cornerback priorities remain. I would not go wide receiver in the first round this year, especially where it's a below average year for wide receiver talent.
The fact that Peter King predicted it makes me worry.
All right, so yeah, Steelers fans, let's talk draft. You want to get your thoughts as to who they should get, what position they should address. This wide receiver conversation, I think it's way too early for that to talk about that in the first round, but we'll get your reaction to it before we do our last Madden Benz Unfiltered wrap-up. Before the draft, we'll wrap it up after the draft next week. Mark, how about the NHL playoffs? And actually, before we get to the NHL playoffs, Anything new you're hearing on the Penguins GM front, or do we have to wait for the playoffs to end in their entirety before the Penguins really get active there?
Rossi said that the search is underway. I think it's very difficult to make a decision while the playoffs are still on. Although, if you're hiring an assistant GM from somebody else, you can do that in the middle of the playoffs. But if you're setting your sights on Dubas, he ain't going to leave till the Leafs are done. And, that's going to be a long series. I don't know. I don't think they're going to get Dubas. I think they should. They're going to get somebody like Darch or Tulsky, some assistant GM whiz kid with an analytics background, and then, hire a staff around him. I'd still bring in Ray Shiro, maybe as the director of hockey ops. But, it's not an attractive job. We should always remember that when we discuss who might take it, Tim, it's not an attractive job. Not at all. How much can you change this team when they have 8 no-movement clauses of some varying degree?
Yeah, I keep saying that, especially for a first-time GM. I don't know if I'd want this gig, and that sounds weird because the Penguins are such a known commodity as a franchise, but because they have so many known commodities still within the franchise itself, it makes it hard to put your stamp on being a GM.
And we shouldn't forget, Tim, Chris Drury got offered this job before Hextall did, and he wouldn't take it. It wasn't an attractive job then, and now he's GM of the Rangers, and he's sitting pretty.
Yeah, as I said on your podcast last week, it sounds funny to say, and I don't mean it to sound like I'm endorsing Hextall at all, because I'm not. I'm just saying that prototype of a guy's been a GM before, whether he was successful or not, a guy who might be a second time on the Ferris wheel in that regard. I think that's the way you go, because at least they've done it before, and there's going to be some cachet and respect and experience for this old veteran group of players and a really entrenched coach that might have to listen to the GM a little bit.
Yeah, you have to bring in somebody who would be perceived as a boss.
Yes, precisely.
And that's where I kind of figure Ray Shiro should have a role.
All right, so we want to hear from Pens fans as well. Type in your comments. We'll get to comments before we hit the top of the hour here on Madden Benz Unfiltered. The playoffs themselves, Mark, you made the comment on our podcast last night that you thought it's just gotten out of control with the physicality, the fighting, just not a very aesthetically pleasing brand of hockey for you for the most part.
Well, I'll go further than that. I think it's a very dirty, ugly brand of hockey. Almost every game is decided late. Thank God for the overtime games, but every game is decided late. My God, we had the Vezina Trophy winner feeling the compulsion to fight yesterday, Linus Ullmark. It's just that part of it has not been fun to watch. There's been a lot of close games, but there's been a lot of that crap too and a lot of cheap shots. And it's all rubber stamped by the various analysts on the network saying it's a man's game. It's that time of year. Okay, whatever.
Yeah, the machismo part, the false, bravery part of it to me. I don't know what bravery really goes into just pushing and shoving and running into the goaltender and scrumming around. Like
well,
that to me.
Let me tell you, there have been stuff like going back earlier in the series. When Ryan Suter's cross-checking Kirill Kaprizov from behind in the back to injure, in that Dallas-Minnesota series, that has nothing to do with bravery.
No, it's a cheap shot.
Ryan Suter and his no career Stanley Cups wouldn't know bravery if it attacked him from behind.
How about goaltending, Mark? Because along with kind of keeping an eye on some fringe candidates or potential names for general manager, I've been trying to watch guys that might be the second goalie if they've gotten in, or like tandem combinations, just any potential goaltender that could be moved for an asset that the Penguins might have in mind. What about you? Do you see anybody that's jumping off the page to you in that regard? I know you talked about Korpisalo before.
Yeah, I was going to say, unfortunately, Korpisalo is doing pretty decent for LA. If they upset Edmonton in the first round, I'm not sure he ever gets to free agency.
Yeah, that's a good point. I don't know. So like, if Ullmark's the guy in Boston, do they try to move Swayman? I'm thinking out loud here.
Swayman's a restricted free agent, Tim, at season's end.
Okay.
So,
but how restricted free agency goes in the NHL, right?
Yeah, it's not likely for him to move, but I'm saying, they're going to have to re-sign some guys, on a pretty expensive team in the first place. So maybe he could be made available in some kind of trade. But then again, what do the Penguins have to give up for a guy like Jeremy Swayman, who is very highly regarded? In fact, Tim, this is a real long shot. It wouldn't shock me if the Bruins moved Ullmark and stuck with Swayman. They've always considered him more highly, and Ullmark kind of double-crossed them by being great this year. That's very, very long shot. But I'm just telling you how they felt before the season started.
No, honestly, I don't think it's all that long of a shot, and it's a different version of the Murray Fleury thing. You know what I mean? It's like it's not as high stakes it feels, or as
without
big
the
name.
expansion draft to screw things up.
Oh, that too. There's no expansion draft either. What have you thought about? I don't know how much you watch Minnesota. The Minnesota goaltending with Fleury and Gustafsson.
They're both pretty good. I mean, ain't neither of them coming here.
How about Freddie Gaudreau coming back? Conn Smythe, Freddie Gaudreau.
If we brought back all the affordable guys who left and became great bottom sixers somewhere else, that's the Penguins would still be in the playoffs and probably leading their series.
All right, so we want to hear from hockey fans.
That's not all on the general manager, Tim. That's on the coach for not giving guys like that opportunity.
Sure, yes,
that they got there. I look at ZAR and Sam Lafferty on Toronto's third line, and I wonder about how Sullivan could have used both of them better here.
All right, so we want to hear from hockey fans too. Let's get to baseball. In the first place, Pittsburgh Pirates. Mark, they're the hottest team in baseball right now, and they just swept the Reds. If you look at who they played, you can put an asterisk on what they've done so far because they haven't played anybody above 500. I guess they did. Now the Astros are, but the Astros, I don't think were over 500 when they played them. They weren't to start the series. I know that. But
hey, Tim, funny you mentioned that because I'm working on a notes column for the Trib about the Pirates. It is probably the first Pirates note column I've done since 2016. And I'm not sure how to do it. So just referring to my notes here, they played 3 last place teams. Also the White Sox 7-15, St. Louis 9-13. Houston's the only winning team they played, barely about 500 at 12-10. Now, I hesitate to criticize or even diminish because the easiest way to avoid being a bad team is to beat bad teams.
Exactly.
So Pirates are doing that. I got to tell you, at 16-7, it's easy to imagine them navigating their way to a 500 season. You don't forget, right now they can go 9 games under 500 the rest of the way and still finish 500. Now, the big kids get out of school and show up at the playground starting tomorrow when LA gets to Pittsburgh. But even LA is just a little bit over 500. So right now, in terms of timing, everything's working out great for the Pirates.
You're also seeing, Mark, a fun brand of baseball, if nothing else. They certainly run the bases well. I wrote about that in the Trib today. They lead the National League in steals. If there's something I'm shaky about, for lack of a better term, it's that, boy, were they reliant on the starting pitching. Have they been reliant on the starting pitching and the bullpen, too? They're getting out to leads. That's nice. They're scoring early. But how many quality starts in a row can they have before they finally have a bad one, you know?
Oh, their pitchers so far, that performance has been an outlier. That's not going to keep up. The 162-game season will correct that. Tim, they don't have a number 1 starter. They know that. They don't have a number 2 starter either. I'm not sure they have a number 3 starter. I think they have a bunch of 4s. I think Keller, Ronzi, we don't know that much about Oviedo yet, but they're probably like all 3s and 4s at their peak. And unfortunately, pitching is the toughest thing to bring in from the outside. Now, do they have anyone in the system that can come up and be a number 1 or a number 2? Maybe, but how quickly? At some point you got to, make the best of what you got, like they did in 13, 14, and 15 till they disassembled it. But I'm not sure the Yankees are going to give us A.J. Burnett again and pay 90% of his salary or whatever that was. I don't know exactly who's in the system. I know it's not Garrett Cole.
Yeah.
So, it's a difficult position with that rotation moving forward. Although, I mean, right now, Tim, they lead MLB in quality starts with 14. That seems ridiculous, but it's true. I keep looking to make sure I'm not reading it wrong.
Well, Mark, is it coincidence? Is it somewhat with the new rules of baseball? Like, I don't know what it is about baseball's atmosphere right now that's fostering this, but you got, like, for instance, the Pirates on top of the Central. You got the Diamondbacks with 74 wins last year leading the West. You got Texas, who had 68 wins last year leading the West in the American League. Baltimore,
maybe they're all just playing bad teams so far, Tim.
Well, do you think that's
I don't know, but
I was kind of thinking maybe it's the good teams just haven't found themselves yet. Like we were talking about before, like the Astros and Dodgers, and even maybe like the Red Sox haven't really ignited yet.
I think part of it with the Pirates is that you look at their base running totals. I think they have they're fifth in the league in MLB in steals. Okay,
I think they're third now. I think they're tied for second. They lead the NL.
Well, whatever they are, they're running the base as well, and I think maybe they figured out, are comfortable with, is probably a better way of putting it, the new base running rules, like the 2 throws over and the bigger bases. It's emboldened them. It's emboldened everybody, to be sure. Maybe that's part of it. With the pitch clock, their pitchers and hitters seem very comfortable with all that's resulted from the pitch clock. I mean, to the point where Austin Hedges changed his walk-up music to get there in more timely fashion.
Crowd-friendly fashion. He wants to hit the exclamation point in Fat Bottom Girls. That's what he wants to do.
Right. So I think there's a lot of little things that the Pirates deserve credit for having adjusted to.
Eric says, does Jari get a big offer from another team, or does Pittsburgh offer him a short-term deal to get by next year or two?
Yes and yes, which means he's out of here.
Bruce, I think other than picking someone for the secondary, defensive line, offensive line, I think that's what he's trying to say there. Defensive line, offensive line, it's tough since you had a rookie quarterback that did not have access to his entire playbook.
Yeah, that's certainly the story anyway. He would have done a lot better if they would have used the whole playbook.
Well, it's been the narrative, Mark, and that's the point I was trying to make earlier.
He couldn't handle the whole playbook as a rookie.
Can he handle the whole playbook as a sophomore?
I don't know.
Like that to me is the biggest wild card, not offensive tackle or cornerback.
Well, I keep saying about Pickett, and people don't like hearing this, but we really still do have the narrative that everything good that happened last year was Kenny Pickett's doing. Everything bad that happened was not his fault. Those 2 game-winning drives, oh my God, this kid has the it factor. And finishing 28th or 29th in every passing category, well, that's because I'm at Canada.
Roy says, I know the Steelers won't trade Deontay Johnson, but they should for somebody else. He stinks.
No, they shouldn't. Shut up. Get this guy out of here.
I just don't see the logic in that if you're creating a hole right before the draft when you've got other holes that need to be addressed. And a poor season for wide receivers in the draft, by the way.
Well, I mean, Deontay has his flaws, but I bet he does better this coming year than last. And I'm not a fan. I think he's a dink, but I think he's a good receiver. And I think that receiving core fits together really well now, Tim. They got the big play threat with Pickens. They got the possession guy with Deontay. They got the slot veteran with Robinson. They got the wild card in Freiermuth. I don't know why you'd want to disrupt that. I don't know what possible good could come from trading Deontay Johnson.
Well, here, I'll piggyback on your previous point about that. That speaks to your suggestion of narrative, which is it's always everybody else's fault when something goes bad, right? So, like, if Kenny Pickett is going to be as good as we are suggesting he's going to be in his second year, that he's going to make all the wide receivers better.
Tim, there's a very real possibility Kenny Pickett could come out in his sophomore year and soil the bed. And I'm not rooting for that, but I'm curious to see how that would be handled.
Richard says whoever gets hired for the Pens GM job will have an incredibly hard time doing really anything to put their fingerprints on the roster with all the no movement clauses and bad contracts.
Yeah, good analysis, Richard. Said that about 10 minutes ago.
Sean says the plan of the NHL playoffs appears to be just go out and hurt the other team. It's nasty out there. The Barstool crowd loves it. It is, and to the point, I think it distracts from the actual game and impacts the actual game if they're going after the best players. We saw this with Crosby last year against the Rangers.
It amuses me no end that the talking heads endorse it. That's the part I don't get.
Jackie says give the Pirates...
Actually, it's the part I do get because, frankly, they're all the types of players that would endorse it.
Jackie says give the Pirates a chance and quit complaining.
Who's complaining? Who's complaining?
We just praised them for being in first place. We're trying to figure out how sustainable it is.
Now, you see, there's a lot of gatekeeping going on with the Pirates. I get like 1,000, not 1,000, I'm exaggerating, but that's what talk radio is. I get a lot of communication saying, hey, we don't need you on the bandwagon. I'm not on the bandwagon. I don't care. I talk about it because it's my job.
No, I understand. I get a lot of that too. And it's like, I don't like posts like this, which more or less declare victory before April is even over. It's like,
let me dig through my notes here, Tim. They could use some people to jump on the bandwagon because I can't find the numbers here. But their attendance was rotten for that series against Cincinnati. Absolutely rotten. And I keep hearing that it's because of school's still in and the bad weather. You come back home after a 5-2 road trip where you swept the last opponent, 3 games at Denver. There should be more people there than were at PNC Park. So don't tell me about a bandwagon. Don't you dare when the attendance was that bad. I think the biggest crowd for those 4 games was 17K. That's an embarrassment for what is supposedly a baseball town.
Eric asked this question. We haven't gotten to this yet. Why give Shelton an extension now? What did you think of that, Mark?
The timing's odd because he lost 100 games the last 2 years, and you're giving him a feel-good extension based on like 20 games, whatever. But I got no problem because A, he is very affordable. B, I don't think Terry Francona is going to come down from Cleveland anytime soon. You just got what you got. He is what he is.
Fred says, let's see where they are at 55 games. I have a 20-game package, and I'm not buying it yet. I think there's every reason to be skeptical. And to my previous point about all these teams that have helium right now and are rising up through the standings as opposed to a year ago, if you're saying we have to buy in on the Pirates after this sample size, well, gee, I guess we have to buy in on the Diamondbacks and the Rangers and the Orioles too.
Tim, I just wrote a baseball notes column after watching about 7 innings total over the past week. So I don't have to buy into anything but getting paid, yo.
I went to 2 games against the Reds, one working, one as a fan. The game that I went to against the Reds where I was working on Thursday lasted 2 hours and 9 minutes. The game I went to as a fan on Friday night, I was at a bar by 8:57 p.m.
Oh, I love the short games. That I will say. In fact, sometimes I turn on the game to watch the end and it's over. That's always been my MO with the Pirates. I watch like the last 3 innings. I tune it in. And if it's close, I watch the rest of it. But when I turned it on a couple times this week, the game was over. And Tim, one thing that's tremendous about the 6:30 start time and the brevity of the games, that 70 show rerun start on the Laugh Channel at 9 o'clock. There's almost never conflict. Although when there is, I think you know what wins.
Hey, Mark.
Burn!
We very briefly referenced this during Unfiltered today. We did talk about it a little bit more on the podcast, but Austin Hedges, the catcher for the Pirates, using his walk-up music as Fat Bottom Girls. He is insisting this has nothing to do with some sort of minor league reference to a girl that, I don't know, was in Double-A when he was in Double-A or whatever the case may be. There's no historical reference here, according to what he's saying. He just says he loves Queen. He said Queen is his favorite band, and he went chapter and verse into how much he really loves Queen. You and I started talking about our favorite Queen songs in the podcast last night. Why doesn't Hammer to Fall? Why doesn't that get more radio play as a classic nowadays as opposed to some of the other greatest hits?
If I'm not mistaken, they played it at Live Aid, didn't they?
Yeah, they did. Yes, they did. Absolutely.
Yeah, should have given it even more notoriety.
It's a great crowd pleaser kind of a song. It's a great rock song.
Did you see the Freddie tribute concert after he passed?
No, I didn't. No.
You know who played rhythm guitar on that song live on stage? I forget who sang vocals, but on Hammer to Fall was Tony Iommi from Black Sabbath.
Oh, no kidding. Really? How'd that sound?
He was apparently a good friend of the Queen guys and Freddie, so he jumped. Oh, it sounded great. I mean, in terms, like, you could give Tony any riff for any song ever, and he would make it sound fuller and thicker. No question.
All right, we will be back next week after the draft to wrap it up. Listen to Mark all week long, Monday through Friday, 3 until 6 on 105.9 The X. He wants nothing but draft coverage. I know Mark wants nothing but draft coverage.
I'm even doing a draft party, Tim. I'm doing a draft party.
Where?
Two on the South Side on Thursday from 8 till 10 with Coors Light. We will usher Peasy into Pittsburgh with a bunch of beer. Now, I got a question. The Steelers pick 17th.
Yes.
Will they pick in the first 2 hours?
I don't think so.
Well, come 10 o'clock, I'm hotter like grain through a goose, so.
I guess it doesn't matter. Peasy will have to come in on his own then. Oh, it's hailing outside. Wow, I'm getting huge hail outside of my house. Are you? Can you see that outside your house?
No hail.
Oh, it's coming.
Plus,
Get ready for it.
the cat would be in a panic. So,
all right, we'll be back next week for the draft wrap-up of Madden Benz Unfiltered here on Trib Live.